and I'm an education specialist at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, community education. And my job today is to educate the community about intensive gardening. And this is, I want to welcome anyone who's come to us through the Harvest 2020 program. And for those, let's see a show of hands. How many people came through Harvest 2020? All right. And how many people haven't a clue what Harvest 2020 is? Let me give you some deep background. Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, PHS, is an educational nonprofit here in the Philadelphia area. We serve the tri-state area, and we also have a train going behind us. We're a membership organization, which means that people joining and people's dues are what pays for us to be able to do these workshops. So if you are not a member of PHS, you should definitely consider doing that. It's not an expensive way to make a whole lot of impact. So that, I mean, you see there's 150 people signed up, 150 people in this class. And today we're talking about intensive gardening. Now let me do a quick definition of what we mean by intensive gardening. It's gardening and it's pretty intense. In the old days, we would plant a single row of something, and then 3 feet away, we would plant another row of something. And then 3 feet away, another row of something, because we needed to be able to get a mule and a plow down the rows between. And I don't know about you, but I haven't seen very many mules in the urban gardens. So what we had to learn was, are there better ways to grow food where we can get a whole lot more food out of a smaller space? And that's what we have begun to do over the last, I would guess, 50 years. I've been doing this for 45, and people were doing it before I did it. So in order to grow things really intensively, it all depends on the soil. If we are going to plant things close together, jam them all in there and make them all grow, we've got to make sure our soil is really, really, really beefed up. So quick and dirty on soil, I didn't even mean that. Quick and dirty on soil, accompanied by the catbirds. We want to make sure that our soil is alive. We've got to make sure that there are lots of micro critters. There's a whole lot of biology going on in our soil, because sure, we've got the basic topsoil, which is our Philadelphia clay. It has lots of minerals in it, and you've heard me say this before many, many, many times if you've been in my classes. We need the chemistry of that clay to give us the minerals that we need. But then we need the biology that comes with compost. So when we put the two of those together, in a proportion of what we like is 30-70, or even 1-2. When we put those together, that's where the magic happens. So we really have to make sure that our soil is ready to support all of the extra stuff that we're jamming into it. All right, so what are the things that we have to think about when we're doing intensive gardening? First of all is the depth of our soil. Yeah, it's great if we've got, we've mixed our topsoil and our compost and everything is happy, but we only have this much of it. It's going to be tough for the plants to grow. And the plants, they do compete with each other, and they compete with the weeds, and they compete with the air, and they compete with everything. So we want to make it as easy as possible. So we're going to give a lot of depth to our soil. One of the ways that we can do this is to build raised beds, because if you're in a situation where your soil sucks, or you've got soil that you're afraid is contaminated, or you have soil that just doesn't exist and what you really got is concrete or blacktop or anything like that, it's easier to build up and to fill than it is to dynamite down. So we build raised beds. This is a container, but it's a pretend raised bed for us for today, until we get the giant film crews that can go out and visit us in all of the gardens. So I've got a nice bed. I would say it's about 8 inches, 9 inches deep. And it has, so it's the equivalent of this.
I stopped hearing you.
I am, can everybody hear me? Put a thumbs up that you can hear me. Okay, everybody else can hear me. My cameraman says I've gotten quiet, and he's known me for years. I've never been quiet a day in my life. I use carrots as my indicator of how deep my soil should be. If I want to grow stubby little round carrots like Planet or Nance, those are cute. I can grow them in that much soil. But if I want to grow a Chantenay or a really good carrot, I need some depth of soil. So depth of soil, content of soil, depth of soil, two important things to think about with intensive gardening. Then I want to think about the plants that I'm going to grow. And I'm going to show you some, the old-fashioned way of gardening. And you don't have to know what these plants are. I'm just using them because they're flowers. They're called Louisia. And they look like a succulent, but I'm using them because they're easy to see on camera. So I'm going to put these in following the directions on the label or the seed pack. And that is to put them in a row. And I want them to be 8 to 10 inches apart. So if I really jam them, I get 3 of them in here. Now, pretending that they're tomato plants, okay? We're gonna really pretend today. This is if I followed the directions. Now, because I've beefed up the soil, I'm going to cheat a little. And I think, oh, let's back up a second. Let's pretend they're tomato plants. And ordinarily, I would get 10 pounds of tomatoes out of each tomato plant over the course of the season. So because I've got 3 in here, I would get 10, 20, 30. I'm asking you to use your imagination because clearly these are not tomato plants. And clearly you're not going to get 10 pounds of tomatoes out of this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a wide row. Instead of planting them the way the instructions say, I'm going to plant them, I'm going to stagger them instead. So they're still 8 inches apart. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a few more in here. They're still almost 8 inches apart. But look how many more I'm going to get in here. So what are the advantages of having them this close together, and what are the disadvantages? Well, the advantages are I can get more in there. But the disadvantages are that they're all competing for nutrition from the soil. They're competing for water. They're competing for air. So if I've already made sure that the soil is really, really good, then I've eliminated the competition for nutrients. But you can see I got considerably more than 3 of them in here. Now, with the old spacing, I was figuring I would get about 10 pounds per plant. So 10, 20, 30. Now, if I jam these together, I'm probably not going to get 10 out of them, but I might get 7. So instead of 30, I might get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 56 times 7 pounds times 8, 56. Is that right? Yes. I would get, instead of 30 pounds out of this same space, I might get as much as 60 out of the same space by putting things closer together. So again, I'm going to have to be very careful with the watering. I'm going to have to be very careful to keep my soil nutrition up. And I'm also going to have to make sure that, that I'm taking care of these plants so that other things don't happen, like there's no airflow or they're too close together and water sits on them.
Hey, Sally, we've got a couple of questions in the chat that are really great.
Okay, you want to get them now?
Yeah, because they're super relevant to seeing you work in the bin. So John was asking, does it matter how close to the edge of your raised bed or your container you're putting your plants? Let's say if it was a tomato plant, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
As long as the soil is deep, because, no, I'm gonna just say no.
And then a few people are asking the same question. What theoretically are you doing to build up your soil nutrition so that your plants aren't competing as much for health?
Oh, that's a really
nutrition?
good question. And if you had been here last week, we would have covered that in the soils and composting class. But what I'm doing is I'm making sure, I'm not going to add any more topsoil because the minerals are already there if I've got my 30-70 mix or at least a 50-50 mix. But what I'm going to constantly be doing is adding compost. Not fresh compost, but well-rotted compost, because compost is filled with those micro organisms that are eating the big pieces and pooping out little pieces, so that they're breaking down the organic matter so that the nutrients become manageable by the roots of the plant. So they're breaking big pieces down into teeny pieces so that the microorganisms can be feeding those to the plant roots, exchanging sugar from the plant roots for the nutrients that they have. So there's lots of interaction going on with these roots, but I have to make sure I've got enough bulk of soil. I have to make sure that it's adequately watered, and I have to constantly be adding new compost. Now, easiest ways to add compost is with, if you have a worm bin or you've got worm compost, because that's so very still alive and active, and it's going to continue to break things down, and it's easily absorbed by the plants. Do I want to at this point add Miracle Grow or some a fertilizer that I would, a chemical fertilizer that I would mix with water? Well, it'll do for once, but that tends to be salty and tends to kill off the microorganisms that are in the soil. So we don't want to do that, because that's who we're counting on to make all these nutrients good for and usable by the plants. Easiest, worm compost sprinkled, compost spread as a mulch, or compost tea watered on the plants. So any of those. Also, I've seen people, there's a movement now again toward time-release fertilizers, organic time-release fertilizers. You want to make sure that you're using organic products because you want the soil to stay alive. Was there another question yet?
I think that answers the bulk of them. Kelly also mentioned that they started a worm bin since our last class and that they're excited to see it going. So yeah,
I'm
double thumbs up to Kelly.
Very
That's
proud,
awesome.
very proud of you. So so this talks about narrow rows versus wide rows, so that I'm using a lot of the space. The disadvantages, and those are the ones we talked about. We've got to make sure that there are plenty of nutrients, so there's no competition for nutrients. We have to make sure that they're well watered, but not overwatered, so they're not competing for water. Now, here's the advantage of putting this many things into a container like this, is as they grow, they are shading the soil. Shading the soil is good for a couple of different reasons. You never want to have naked soil, but letting the leaves of these plants overlap and shade the soil means the soil doesn't dry out as fast, which is a great thing, because as plants dry and wet, they get stressed. So we don't want that to happen. We'd like to have even moisture. So the leaves overlapping does a really good job of keeping the ambient moisture high. It keeps ambient means like real close to. It keeps the soil temperature down so that there aren't the extremes. So it shades. And it also, it keeps it from drying out. It also keeps, when it keeps the soil shaded, the other advantage to that is weed seeds are sitting in there waiting to be exposed to light. So that's why every time you dig your garden, you get a whole new crop of weeds, and you say, where the heck did they come from? It's because the seeds were waiting there to be exposed to light, and that's what caused them to germinate. And so as we're growing together and shading things, then we're keeping the seeds from germinating. So that's one method, wide row, that is something that we like to use in intensive gardening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these guys out, and we're going to talk about succession planting and interplanting. So interplanting, thank you. A little applause for our stars here. So I got this much real estate, and you know, real estate's an expensive thing. If we were rich, we would be investing in it all right now. So what I want to do is I want to get the most out of my real estate. So what I'm going to do is early in the spring, because I have to think about timing. Early spring, a lot of gardeners, new gardeners especially, feel like Mother's Day is your starting point. Halloween is your ending point, because here in the Philadelphia area, we're in zone 7. So that means our frosts, which used to be fairly reliable and have gone all lately. It used to be the 1st of May to the 15th of May was when our last frost would happen. And that meant Mother's Day was a good day to get started. Halloween to November, October 15th to November 15th, somewhere in there would be our second frost. We've pushed it in either direction. So now officially April the 15th is our last frost. This year we had a frost on May the 14th. Who thought that was a good idea? The other end as late as November 15th, almost November 30th. So what we need to remember is that's not the only time we can garden. We can be gardening as early as January, and we can be gardening as late as January. So there's nothing to stop us from having something going almost 12 months of the year. So if I've got this much real estate, I'm going to be growing a spring crop, an early spring crop, and we're going to pretend, oh, parsley, that's a good spring crop. So I'm going to put, I'm going to have my parsley in here. Actually, parsley is a poor choice. We're going to pretend that this is lettuce, but I don't have any lettuce because it's too late in the season. So we've got our spring crop that likes cool weather, and we've got our, so we planted this in the spring. And then as this is growing and growing, and we're eating and eating and growing and eating, May comes along and I'm still eating this stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I'm just going to leave these in the pots. I'm going to take a summer crop, and I'm going to put a summer crop in here so that when these guys are done, say these are lettuce heads, when I harvest them, suddenly all of this real estate is open. But since I thought ahead, I already have plants, summer plants growing here. They're ready to take over this space when these guys are done. And they've already been growing, so they're not so big that they're competing with the spring crop, but the summer crop is getting, it's starting to beef up, and it's ready to go and take over this space. So I've got a spring crop, and then I've got a summer crop coming in as the spring crop is going out. We're going to talk more about that next week and the timing of all of our different spring and summer and fall crops. So I've got my spring, the boarders that are using the real estate. Then I've got the new renters coming in, and they're moving in as these guys are moving out. And then toward the end of the season, I can consider working in some fall crops around the summer crops, so that I'm getting like 3 different crops out of the same space. So that's what we call interplanting. So it's 2 different timing of plants that in the same amount of space. Now we can also, we could also plant 2 different crops, but one of them is going to shade the other. This could be a disadvantage, or this could be an advantage. So if I want my spring crops to last a little bit longer, maybe I'm going to plant taller crops to get bigger and shade them a little bit So I'd have, if the sun is coming from the south, these taller ones will shade the smaller ones and give them a little bit more time to ripen up. So that's interplanting.
Hey, Sally, a few people are wondering, what are some crops that you would be planting right now? I did say that in our follow-up email, we can share the seasonality calendar that we have so people can see it throughout the year. But for right now, in this moment, what are some things that people
For right
should be
now, in this
starting?
moment, we are still planting. We are still planting from plants. We're planting tomatoes. We're planting peppers, eggplants, squash, cucumbers, any of those crops. We're planting them now because they like the heat of summer to ripen up. What we're not planting right now is, it's hard, Train. It's hard. If the soil is hot, it's very hard to grow, to start growing the cold crops, not cold crops, the cold crops, so your cabbage family. So right now we're not planting broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, mustards. We're not planting them. We're going to hold off another couple of months and plant them again for the fall so that they can ripen up when the soil and the air are cooler. So other things that we can be planting, for instance, I have in my garden a bed of bok choy. Beautiful bed of bok choy, but it's all starting to go to seed. So I'm eating it as it's flowering, but in around it, I have planted I have planted beans. So now my bok choy is no longer a head. It's starting to get this tall with flowers at the top. So I'm eating it and chopping up the stems and leaves while the beans are this tall. So as soon as all of that bok choy is out of there, then the beans can fill out that bed. And I can get a crop of beans in there around the bok choy. So does that answer? Are there other questions related to that?
Would you say that it's too late to start cucumbers directly after peas?
If I said it's too late to plant cucumbers, it is not too.
Okay.
When would be too late?
I guess, yeah, when would be?
Okay, when would be too late? Okay, this is when you have to start doing your math. If you read the seed pack will say 80 days to maturity. So with some cucumbers, other cucumbers, you'll look at them and they'll say 45 days. 45, that's 50 days. So you might have 50 days or you might have 80 days. I am not at this point. Let's do the math. When is our frost? Let's say November 1, just for ease of. So November 1st, so let's count back 80 days. 90 days would be 3 months. 80 days would be 2.5 months. So November to October to September to August. So I would say up until August, I could be planting cucumbers. It's getting a little late then because even though we haven't had a frost, it's not as warm and sunny at the end, so they take longer. So what I would do is if I've got a choice between 80-day plants and 50-day plants, at this point, I'm going to be planting the 50-day plants. It's hard when I can't see faces. It's like, did that make sense? Cassidy nod and say that made sense, or wait, clarify something.
That made sense, and also we'll share the seasonality chart, and that will be really fun to like stare at when you're in the bathroom.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about interplanting, and now I want to talk about succession planting.
I have a question. Can you
All right,
guys hear
we got a
me?
question out there.
Yes. Did I hear or see that you were saying Miracle Grow is not good to use to grow plants?
I'm not sure how you got unmuted, but that's a good question, so I'm going to answer it quickly. Did everybody hear that question? Am I the only one that heard the question?
I think we all heard it, Sally.
Oh, okay. So the question is Miracle Grow, if I am growing containers and I am growing flowers in containers and I want my flowers to look beautiful and I really don't care about the condition of the soil, then I would use Miracle Grow on them. If I am growing stuff out in the garden, what I want is my soil to be as alive as I can get it. And Miracle Grow is a chemical salt. And so it tends to kill the earthworms, it kills the bacteria and the fungus that is actively feeding the soil. So I don't recommend using Miracle-Gro unless I've got little containers or house plants that I'm going to then bring into the house. Then Miracle-Gro is a perfectly adequate and probably your best bet. But if I'm growing my stuff outside and it's not going to come into the house, I want my soil absolutely teeming with life. People get a little squeamish about bringing teeming with life stuff into their houses. I say this as I'm watching spotted lanternflies just walk all the way across my screen over and over and over. There's 3 of them lined up there now. So I hope that answered the Miracle-Gro question. Because now I want to go on to, I want to talk about succession planting. So we're going to pretend, these are basil plants, and we're going to pretend that I planted those a month ago. And that's why they're so big and pretty. So I've got them in my, and they're not in, I would have taken them out of the pots. We're just setting them here for, so I've got them ready to go. But, you know, I like the idea of also having some babies in reserve. So these I planted 3 weeks ago, I know, pretend, and these I'm planting today. So I'm going to have new baby plants so that when I have picked all of my basil to make some pesto to put in the freezer, I have new little plants coming in. And yeah, I probably shouldn't crowd them, but it looks nicer here for the camera. So I've got my original planting, and then 3 weeks later, I am planting a succession crop, the same thing, but this is especially good with beans. And I also like to do it with squash because beans have a time when they're just really pumping out the fruit. The actual bean plants are pumping out the beans. And then when you pick all the beans, fairly soon the plant is depleted. And we would cut it off or pull it out. But in the meantime, same as when I was using the interplanting, while I'm using these up, these are on deck, and these are then coming into their own, so that I might get 2 weeks of picking out of these beans, and by then it's almost time for these guys to have beans on them. I know these are basil, but you get the idea. So I'm planting something, and then 3 weeks later I'm planting something else, and then the same thing, a rerun. And then 3 weeks later, I'm going to get one more crop in. So I might get as many as 3 crops of the same thing in. Can I read the labels and say, oh, these are 45-day beans, these are 65-day beans, these are 80-day beans? Could I plant them all together in the same place at the same time, like 3 rows of them, and have them mature at different times? You can, but it's easier if you're planting the same thing and staggering them. So I'm hoping that that was clear. But that's what I would call succession planting or staggered planting. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was trellising. I didn't talk about trellising at all. So I'm going to take my little pretend beans out, which are actually basil plants, and I'm going to talk about trellising. So I have cucumber plants, and my cucumber plants tend to take up a lot of space. So do pumpkins, so do any of the running squash. So what I want to do is I want to get these, I'm going to give these something to climb on. Now with a tomato, you would give it a tomato cage. You could build a wooden trellis. I'm just doing this because this is all part of the bells and whistles that go with an earth box. Come. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the cucumbers climb up, and that's going to take up vertical space instead of horizontal space. So remember the old story of the 3 sisters garden where corn and beans and squash. the 3 plants planted together in the same hole, so that corn becomes the trellis, beans will climb the corn, and while the beans are climbing the corn, they're also helping to enrich the soil, because that's what the bean family does. And then squash will grow flat. Pumpkins or squash will grow flat and keep the soil cool and the moisture level even. So I've got 3 plants growing together, having an almost symbiotic relationship, each serving a purpose in the overall planting. So these will eventually climb up, and so I will use this space for my cucumbers rather than all of my garden space, so that where these would be sprawling, I can be planting other things. So again, there are many, many different kinds of trellises. This is just one that straps onto my grow box here easily. But can I build my own out of just about anything? Yes. Could I just have a framework and strings climbing down? Could I take bamboo or sticks and make a teepee to grow things up? Yes. Use your imagination, but use your vertical space so you can use your horizontal space for other things. So the last thing I want to talk about is season extenders. And I don't have any with me.
Hey, Sally, before you
Yeah.
jump to that, can you actually talk a little bit more about trellising? So what plants will vine and climb up the trellis on their own, and what plants do you actually need to train?
Okay, the ones that the ones that people, the most common trellising that we do is tomatoes in a tomato cage, which isn't, we don't think about that as a trellis, but what we're doing is we're getting a structure for the plant to grow in rather than on, so that it is more exposed to the air, it's more exposed to the light, because tomatoes like to get blight. They like to get funguses when they are kept wet all the time. So training them up not only frees up your real estate, but it also keeps them dried out so that they don't get the fungus blights quite as often. So tomatoes is the most obvious, but the one that people think about when they think about trellises is you think about cucumbers or squash. Now there's 2 different ways that squash will go. If you've got something that gets tendrils on it, squash will do that, cucumbers will do that. You'll see the little curly cues that grab onto things. So they grow that way naturally. Tomatoes, if you are growing them on a trellis, you have to actually attach them to the string and pull them up. So tomatoes, you have to physically attach to a trellis, but cucumbers and most of the squashes and pumpkins, they will climb, they will hold on to something like a morning glory does. Everybody knows what a morning glory looks like. So zucchinis, on the other hand, zucchinis do not climb. Zucchinis grow more as a bush and a sprawler, but they do not get those tendrils, so they will not climb. So don't try to get a zucchini to climb up a trellis. That's not going to work. But the difficulty with a trellis is if you have something that gets a heavy fruit on it, like if you have a watermelon or a melon and you're trying to grow it on a trellis because you don't have the room, you're in a community garden and you don't want it sprawling over into your neighbor's garden, what you need to remember is the fruit itself is heavy. So you need to make sure that you would not grow watermelon on this stringy thing that I just showed you. That was just a string net. You would have a much heavier trellis and you would support each of the fruit. What way I've seen people do this, they make like a little hammock for each of the fruit that attaches to the trellis. So you might, it kind of looks like you've made a brazier for your watermelons or your melons to hold them up. That's what supports them. Because otherwise the weight of a really big fruit will pull either pull the plant off the trellis or pull the trellis down. So easy cucumbers, gourds, they're all no-brainers when it comes to trellises. The heavier fruited melons, Yes, they can still climb, but you've got to attach them. You've got to support the fruit. And then zucchini, you don't want to try to grow that up at all. Okay,
keep
so the
moving.
last thing I want to talk about is season extenders. We have, everybody knows the whole run out at the end when you hear there's going to be frost and cover your tomatoes with blankets. Well, that's a very simple season extender. But you can also plan ahead so that you are planting things earlier in the spring, but covering them up with a cold frame. I've seen people take milk jugs, cut the bottoms out, and use them as little mini greenhouses. So you can cover things with plastic, you can cover them with netting, you can cover them with all of those things. You can make a cold frame with an old window so that you have things growing all the way into the winter. We're going to send you the planting chart that tells you how late you can still plant things. But more or less, you can be planting salad greens into like October, up to October the 10th is usually my deadline. Indigenous Peoples Day is usually the best cutoff. So around October the 10th is when you stop planting your fall crops. And then you can continue to grow them out and use them while you're otherwise sitting inside under a blanket trying to stay warm. So things that we can do to stretch the season. We stretch the season in the beginning by starting seeds indoors, bringing them outside under cover in some kind of a protected environment. And then at the other end of the season, we are covering them again to keep them going even when it's colder outside. Two other things that we can use. One other thing, the best thing, water is a very good storage mechanism for heat. So if I am starting my things early in the season, and we're past this, so now we need to think about what we're doing in the fall. So we've got jugs of water sitting next to a plant, soaking up the heat of the sun, and then slowly over the course of the evening and night, they're releasing that heat back into the air. And if they're sitting right next to a plant, they're helping to keep that plant from freezing. Because the difference between 33 degrees and 32 and a half degrees and 32 degrees, it's like a half a degree. The difference between that and that is a live plant, a dead plant. So what we're trying to do is to just keep the temperature above 32 so that we keep the plant from freezing solid, because once it freezes solid, most plants, they're done and that's it. So anything that we can do to protect them, insulate them, buffer them, that's what we do as season extender at either end. And that's how we manage to get our gardens. We're growing them intensively, not just space-wise, but time-wise. We're growing them, we're extending the time all the way out around behind us from January to January, trying to get as many crops out of our garden as we can. I mean, why we're still paying rent on it. We might as well have stuff growing in it the whole year round. So let's do a quick review. We've got, we worry about our soil. We keep our soil happy. We keep our soil alive. We generate as much soil as we can. So we've got the depth of soil to give us a buffer zone. So we might build raised beds. We might just hill things, but we're doing what we can to concentrate the soil where we're growing things. So we've done a lot of soil work. Then we've got, we're going to do vertical gardening so that we're using the vertical space with trellises rather than letting them sprawl and use up all our space that way. We're interplanting, where we're planting cool season crops in the same space as warm season crops. We plant the cool season crops in cool season. Then as those are maturing, we're starting to introduce the summer plants. Then when these are done, the summer plants take the space. Then at the other end of the season, the summer plants are finishing up. We're introducing the fall crops, which are very much the same as the spring crops. So we've got a spring season, we've got a summer season, we've got a fall season, and then there's all of the manipulations that we do with extending with artificial means like, you know, cold frames and stuff like that, as the season extenders. The wide row versus narrow row, so that the plants themselves are, although we have more of them and they're getting slightly less fruit, they are supporting each other, and we're getting more out of the space. And then the last thing the last thing was the succession crops, where we plant the same thing, and then 3 weeks later we plant it again, and 3 weeks later we plant it again, so that we get a much wider season for harvest.
I have used Miracle Grow gardening soil. That's good for vegetables, fruits, flowers as well, and it's for in-ground. Have you ever tried that? You don't recommend that there?
I so do not recommend that.
Really?
I really don't. Oh, yes. Well, what happens is what you're doing is you are giving it so much concentrated nutrients that you tend to grow the plants out. I mean, it grows them faster, and it wears them out faster. So it also doesn't give you, when your soil has lots of nutrients in it, not minerals, which is what the Miracle Grow adds. Miracle Grow adds minerals, it doesn't add the nutrients. When you have a lot of nutrients in your soil, then your margin for error is so much bigger.
Okay.
What it means
So
is...
what did you say you recommend? That's why I'm asking, because I grow a lot of things, and I noticed I had some zucchinis. They grew almost as big as watermelon.
You know, some people, it just works for them. I am one of those people that it doesn't work so well for, and so I have stopped using it, because I found that if I got a dry day, they dry out much faster with the Miracle Grow soil. That it just seems to grow. Also, Miracle Grow soil is mainly made out of, it's got a lot of peat moss in it. Peat moss itself is a non-renewable resource. So once we use up the peat moss, it's gone. So until they start using the coconut coir or something like that instead of peat moss, they're not winning my love.
So coconut coir, I use coconut coir as well, and I also do my own composting.
Are you adding compost to your beds that have the Miracle Grow soil in them? Well, then you are amending all of the stuff.
Yes,
so
I am.
So what you're doing is you are saving the Miracle Grow. You're saving the plants from the effects of the Miracle Grow. So you are using the Miracle Grow plus you're composting, and you're adding the compost. I would say that mostly it's the compost that you're adding that's making your plants good. And that if you're good at that, then
I do amend a lot. And I use I also use alpaca poop.
Oh.
I have family members that have alpacas, so I get a lot of that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So Leo 1 says hi, and 2 says,
hi, Leo.
I got that succulent from you. Can you tell me the name of the succulent that you gave Leo?
No.
No.
Did it look like, Leo, did it look like this? Did it come out of the perennial pack? If it came out of the perennial pack, it's a Lewisa, Lewisa. If it's a succulent, I have no idea. So, this, if you say you did get this one from me, then that's Lewisa. I don't know anything about it. It was a gift. So you research that and get back to us. Okay.
All right. So then we had a few questions about composting. And people were asking, like, how often do you compost? What do you compost with? So my personal opinion is I always compost once at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season. And then if I'm feeling like, ooh, and I have the material, maybe I'll compost in the middle. But what's your opinion on that?
What I do is when I have, I put a lot of compost in first thing in the spring. Then as I plant new things, I like if I decide to dig a hole and put a cucumber in it, I'm going to throw compost into that hole as well. So when I prepare the soil, I add compost, and then I'm throwing a little extra compost in, or I take my worm compost, and what I do is, and we're going to repeat the compost and soil class at the end of in July, because June is almost over. It's halfway over.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get to I'm waving around because I am totally surrounded by mosquitoes. So you'll excuse me. I'm not doing voodoo. I got mosquitoes. So I like to take compost, the spent compost or the compost juice that leaks out of the bottom of my my worm bin into the retention basin. I take that and I put it in a watering can. I might take a cup of that or a handful of that and put that in my watering can, shake it up. I don't have a rose on the end of my watering can anymore. I just have an opening. And then I water with that as I plant each plant. I'm trying out this new, somebody gave me this, seaweed emulsion planter that's supposed to be high in both nitrogen and phosphorus. So I'm gonna try that out as I water, because I'm still planting tomatoes. I had a garden crisis where somebody decided to dump a tree into my garden. So I'm a month behind replanting. So I'm going to give everybody a boost of worm compost, a little bit of straight compost, and then I'm going to water with maybe a little bit of the seaweed emulsion to see if I can get things hurried along.
Some people were wondering if you could buy compost, which the obvious answer is like, yeah, you could buy it. But I also think you could do what like Maxine was saying, where if you have family or friends that have alpaca compost that you could be using and putting in your garden, definitely do that. Or like if you have a worm bin, do that. Or if you're in Philly, you can go to the Recycle Center in Fairmount. And there's so many resources that we could be using for free that you don't have to be buying compost.
That's a really good point. If you are buying compost, do not go to the Home Depot and buy a bag of compost, because that stuff, or Lowe's or don't buy bags of compost, because they've been sitting there probably a year in the warehouse. There's nothing alive in them. There's still organic matter in there, but you could get it so much cheaper somewhere else. If all you have is the compost that you bought from the store, then what you need to do is to hit up somebody that has composted and do get a bucket from them and introduce that into the soil, because what you're doing is like, it's like a sourdough starter. What you're getting is a starter for your compost. So get some compost from somebody else, introduce that into your compost, and you will then have the right mix of the micro critters that are in there. So you can make your dead compost that you bought from the store become alive again.
One thing I wanted to say too is, if you don't know people directly that are composting, a great resource is Puffin. It's a Google group, Philadelphia Urban Farming Network. So if you're in the area or if you're just in the region, people all the time are posting like, I have this and I can give it away, or I'm in search of this. So I know it can feel a little daunting to be like, I don't know anybody who has a worm bin, what the heck? But you can always put it out to the Google group, and people are super welcoming and willing to share, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's true. The next question was, why are you breaking off the bottom and throwing it away of those plants? Okay, these have been sitting, if you see, can you see this? I'm going to get dirt on my keyboard, but hey, they pay me so much, I'll buy 5 more computers tomorrow. You can see how those roots are there are so many roots down there, and they've just grown in and out of each other. So what I've done is I have removed the knots of them, and each of these, because I have injured them slightly, they're going to say, oh my God, I better grow new roots. So they will grow new roots. Whereas if I just took the one that has, they're really stuck. Okay, if I took this and stuck it into the ground just the way it is, the roots would continue to grow inward because that's what they're used to. So I want to wake them up and shake them up. So I take the bottom off, and I might also, since I took the bottom off, I should probably also do some loosening up like this, just again to break them of they're so used to growing inward that we want them to just start to grow outward and put out new roots in the soil. The other thing is that I couldn't get them all the way in because there's something in the soil of this that I couldn't get them deep enough to look like they were planted. So I did all of those things at once to make it happy. Do we have a video of last week's soil and composting class? Not yet.
Yeah, but I did want to say we do have recordings of things. We're editing them. We'll be sharing them out. So it's just a matter of being patient and stay posted, because we will be sharing them out in follow-up emails to everybody. And we're also doing repeats of all of the past workshops too, so you can register and it'll be like you didn't even miss anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there.
Sally, can you talk one more time about reading the seed packet? Because I think that'll answer a lot of questions about knowing what things we should be planting right now and if it's too late to be seeding things.
Okay, I don't have a seed packet with me, but if you look at the seed packet will tell you, will always tell you days to maturity, because that's how you know what what your timing is. So you've got early season, mid-season, and late season of just about everything. Let's take, for example, tomatoes. That's those are everybody's favorite thing to grow. Early girl will put out, early girl and patio. Those are two different, I think patio is still around. They're a small tomato, and they will put tomatoes out in 45 days. So if you put them in the ground today, in a month and a half, you can have tomatoes. Yay, that's a wonderful thing. Then the big beefsteak tomatoes, which take longer to, because the plant is generally indeterminate, which means it wants to grow and grow and grow and grow. It doesn't just grow to a certain size and stop. It will keep growing forever. So you might have tomatoes that are as late as 80 days or 90 days to maturity. So you could have tomatoes early, or you could have tomatoes late. So what if I'm not getting planted until after the 4th of July? Well, then I'm going to be planting a lot of early girls, because I want to make sure I've got tomatoes early enough to pick them before the weather goes crazy in the fall, because it was so crazy in the spring. How do we know what it's going to be like in the fall? We have no clue. So, but it will tell you that on the pack. The seed packs are fountains of information. So they will also tell you how deep to plant a plant, how far apart to plant a plant. You take the depth as gospel, take the distance with a grain of salt. So if you are going to try to jam more in than it says in the pack, do that. But planting them deeper than it says on the pack is not a good idea.
And someone was asking about planting lettuce underneath your tomatoes so that they're shaded as your tomatoes are growing up. You do that too, right, Sally?
I do that. Not so much lettuce, unless more I do. If I'm in a I'm going to be doing that this year, because my beds are particularly wide. If I have a tiny row, if I'm planting, if my row is only this big, my bed is only this big, and I'm jamming tomatoes into it, it's harder. But if I have a wider bed and I can get some distance, because the roots of the tomatoes are fairly widespread too. So I don't want to be digging in the roots of the plants to put stuff. But what I might do is using the tomatoes as a curtain, as a shade, plant the lettuce a little distant from it where the shade's going to cover it.
All right, are you ready for some zucchini questions?
I'm ready for some.
I've got at least
questions.
two of them.
All right.
So One, we already talked about how you don't need to trellis zucchinis, right?
You don't want to trellis zucchini. It doesn't work.
So follow-up question.
Yes.
So if you need more space, right, and you are like want to move your zucchini as it's growing, like outside of your raised bed or container, can you leave it on the concrete? Is it going to burn your zucchini?
You can leave it on the concrete. The problem is if there's your neighbor is that close to you. If you're in a community garden, you don't want stuff growing out of the bed. But the nice thing is what you're doing is you're concentrating your effort of building your soil to within the bed. And so you want the zucchini growing planted within the bed, but where it ultimately ends up trailing makes no difference to the nutrition of it, as long as the roots are in good soil. So it can go anywhere, yeah.
So next question, also about zucchini. If you are trying to keep the stem of the zucchinis a little bit elevated to like prevent disease or rotting, what can you use? Do you just mound the soil? Do you stake it up? What do you do? Well,
mounding the soil is no different than leaving it on the soil, because it's still on the soil. What you're trying to do is to keep it up so that it doesn't rot. The stem doesn't rot. The bottom of the zucchini doesn't rot. You can, I've seen a lot of people use straw or hay. I have seen people just take a plastic flower pot upside down and set it underneath something to keep it. But the problem is that the plants grow so fast. Zucchini plants can grow as much as a foot in a day if you've got a good rain and nice warm night temperature. So it's eventually going to push the pot and keep going. But yeah, I mean, you can do that to keep things off the ground. More the problem, and we need to talk about this when we talk about diseases and pests, which we haven't put on the list. So we're going to have to add diseases and pests to the end of the beginner gardener list. We're going to talk a little bit about them next week, because we're going to talk about the timing of your plants around the seasons, and we're also going to talk about the timing of your plants around the scourge of the peak time for insects and diseases. So that's part of a little bit what we're going to talk about next week. But more you're worried about the zucchini. I like to have my zucchini trailing along the ground because I tend to get bugs in it and they eat through the stem. So if I can keep the stem 3 feet down rooted, I'll mound soil over we'll talk about that with the bugs. But I like to keep mine on the ground so that it can drop roots anywhere that it wants, if it wants to.
So next up in the chat, there's a few questions about companion planting and spacing. In the chat, I shared a link. It's like a really nice PDF of what things work really well together and then what crops you don't necessarily want to plant together because they compete too much for the same nutrition. So I would say look for that link. It's a hyperlink, so you can just click it and it'll open up in your web browser. The other thing about spacing is a good rule of thumb is just reading your seed packet to know what the seed recommends or like what the distributor recommends for spacing.
Right, and you can push it. If you really work on your soil and you get your soil improved, you can push it. I mean, often they'll say, 3 feet apart, but if your soil is better, you could push it to 2 feet apart. And also know that 2 feet apart in this direction, if I've got, 2 feet apart here, I could also have 2 feet apart here and 2 feet apart here so that I could stagger them and they're still going to be 2 feet apart, but I can get 2 rows instead of 1 row and still keep them the right distance. So read the seed packet, Seed packets and seed catalogs are such wonderful sources of information. So read your seed packets and read your seed catalogs.
Here's a really good question. So Kelly's asking, when you're densely interplanting, is it better to leave the roots in instead of pulling them up if you have younger plants also starting in there?
If you have, I would not pull out my old plants unless they are dead. If they are not dead, I would cut them off because yes, you don't want to be ripping up the roots because that's going to disturb the planting of the of the new plants. I mean, unless they're, you know, really in bad shape and they come right up, beans will come right up without really wrecking the soil of the roots of the ones next door. But
Right.
you'll judge. But if you're going to be pulling an old plant out and it's going to a honking big root with it, you cut it, prune it, scissor it, use a knife, but don't yank.
I forget who asked this, but I did see in the chat, someone has asparagus that I guess is just growing up and came back from a previous year. If you don't want it, do you just rip it out?
If you don't want your asparagus?
Or if you want to just like make room for something else. They were saying that it's really like ungainly, I think was the word that they used.
The big tall ferns that are what used to be the little asparagus spears are what is feeding the root for next year. If you cut them off, what you're doing is you're not allowing them to feed themselves to survive the winter. So the more you cut them off, the fewer you'll have next year. So if what you've done is you're just sick and tired of the asparagus, then you can cut them off and just plant on top of them, because the roots are a foot down. I mean, you planted them deep. You should have planted them deep if you did it right. But if what they're doing is shading everything and taking up way too much space, then you have to decide who's going to get the real estate. Can you prune them back because they're really ungainly? You could cut them back and make a nice little tidy hedge out of them if that makes you happy.
Can you also talk about growing strawberries in containers?
Strawberries in containers. Strawberries seem to be very happy in containers. And as long as you keep, three things are important for strawberries. You want to make sure that they don't like their roots disturbed. So if they are in containers, have you seen the strawberry containers? You've got, let's say you've got strawberries in the top, and then you've got holes in the side, and things are planted into the holes in the side, and they are perfectly happy growing that way. Herbs the same way, but especially strawberries. To keep strawberries, the fruit, happy, you want them not to be touching the ground, because as they're touching the ground, they tend to pick up rot and they tend to pick up bugs. So if you can have them hanging out of the side of a container, they're perfectly happy to do that. And they will grow and grow. And then they'll put out runners, and the runners will hang down, and you can plant the runners in containers as well. So you want to keep them evenly moist. You want to have the soil nice and full of organic matter. And you want the strawberries to be able to hang out of the outside of the container if you can. And when they get too crowded, divide them and give them to someone else for their containers.
All right, Sally. So the next burning question is all about pest control.
Okay.
So I know we've talked about like netting and row cover. We've talked about companion planting, which like a lot of people will use marigolds and different types of flowers to keep pests away. What else would you recommend as a pest control?
Most important is to know your pests. You have to do your homework, because there are a lot of people. We've had an absolute scourge the last 10 years of Harlequin bugs, which get on, most especially they get on the cole crops, the cabbage family, but they get on Swiss chard. They'll get on a lot of your flowers, but they are exactly the same color as ladybugs. So people see ladybugs, and unless they're thinking, unless they know, wow, ladybugs are only half as big, they're twice as big, but they're the same color, so automatically they start smashing the ladybugs. So you need to know what your pests are, and you need to know to anticipate. The best gardener is one who anticipates what's coming. There is no way in hell that we could have anticipated how many spotted lanternfly nymphs are out there right now. I've never seen an infestation like this of any kind of bug ever anywhere except for tent caterpillars at the worst seasons. So that said, if we know things are coming, we know how to prepare for them. So to be proactive in preventing your the bugs from coming, that is putting up your shields, putting up your netting, keeping the butterflies out of your collard greens by covering them with netting, keeping the baby squashes protected so that the wasp doesn't come in and lay the eggs in the stem. So prevention is the best thing. The second thing is to use the least strong, once you've got them and once you starting to see the bugs, getting rid of them as soon as you can when you just have a few, and not seeing a few and then going on vacation for 2 weeks and coming back and finding that your plants are gone because they've been eaten. So you need to prevent them. Then you need to deal with them when they're small and there's only a few. And then when you get an infestation that is big, you start using the least toxic spray or dust that you can find. Most organic gardeners are okay with Safer soap, which is an insecticidal soap. You use Safer soap on bugs that suck, and you use neem oil, which is a plant-derived pesticide. It is still a pesticide, even though it's organically derived, and that is for chewing insects. So then the worst thing is when they get really, really bad, you have to find a way to get rid of them rather than killing them, get rid of them so that you are not giving them to someone else. So what that might mean is, I'm again thinking of the Harlequin bugs. We had them on our collards and our broccoli so bad in one of my community gardens that we finally took trash bags and put them over the whole plant, ripped the whole plant up, tied off the bags, and put them out for the trash, because there was no way that we could deal with that many bugs in the garden without killing the plants. So
Darlene's asking, where do you rank Dawn's soap in that lineup of
Dawn's
pest
soap.
control?
Dawn's soap is an insecticidal soap. So it is a soap, and the way it works is pretty much the same. You know how they tell us that we need to wash our hands because it dissolves the coating of the coronavirus. So we wash our hands with soap and water, because soap really does break down the protein coats. So with small insects that suck, like the aphids and the mealybugs and those things, we're spraying them with a strong soap, and it eats the coating. It eats the coating of their shells. So Dawn's soap is an insecticidal soap. But Dawn also has a Dawn's dead bug or something. It's Sabadillo, which is still considered by organic gardeners to be okay, but it's on the line, because everything that will kill insects, even the more organic things, are of a danger to bees, because bees are insects. So we have to know, you do your homework again, and read your labels, because a bug spray will come and it will say, only use it in the evening when the bees are in. It's like, or don't use it on rainy days because then you have to use twice as much. Or, there will have directions on them to make them much safer. And if you are using a pesticide that for one bug that is not on the label for that, then chances are it's not a good idea, and it could harm the plants and bees. So all of these things are important, and I can't express enough to read the labels.
Zane's asking a really great question about pruning, which hits on a question that somebody asked earlier about pruning the suckers off of tomato plants. But like, what pruning techniques could people be doing to increase harvest and yield?
Tomatoes, I don't tend to prune mine, but Ed, who is my coworker, Cassidy's my coworker, Ed prunes his faithfully, and Ed gets more tomatoes than I do because Ed pays more attention to his plants. I think if I paid more attention, even if I didn't prune them. But here's an interesting thing that I saw on YouTube. The gardener had cut off all the suckers so that the plants would grow straighter and not fatter, and took the suckers and put them in water and rooted them and made more plants. So go to town.
That was my advice too. I wrote in the comments, I was like, it's great to do it, and also aesthetically is really nice, but also like if you're feeling lazy, you don't have to do it. You know, like tomatoes would grow on the ground if you let them, you know. So if you want to be a lazy, low maintenance gardener, like that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I've learned over the years that I like to use tomato cages because I get pill bugs in my garden, and they get in the tomatoes. The squirrel makes a bite because they're sons of, we won't say what squirrels are, but squirrel takes a bite out, and then you can still eat a tomato if a squirrel's taking a bite out of it. You just cut that piece out. But then the bugs, if it's laying on the ground, you're going to get more bugs in it. So I have issues with squirrels. I have issues with bugs getting in. So I like to grow mine in cages. But I find that if I prune them too much, they get sunburned. And you'll see on the tomatoes, you'll see on the sunny side, you got a dead spot, not the black spot on the bottom. That's a different story altogether. That's blossom end rot. But you'll see the side really, sometimes they get sunburned. So I stopped doing that when I'm gardening in full sun. But Ed does it when he's gardening in full sun, and he grows beautiful tomatoes. So whatever floats your boat in the pruning department. I'm told that pruning the ends of branches when your fig tree is loaded with figs will ripen the figs up sooner. I've heard that works. But as far as pruning, more pruning is an aesthetic thing. You know, it's gotten too big and it's going too far that way, prune it back. Pruning, what else do you prune?
We prune raspberries.
I was going to say
our brambles,
but that's something that you learn when is the best time to prune, and you prune them all at once rather than
we do it at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Like when we're about to put the community garden to rest. And we were actually just talking about this last Thursday at our garden meeting. But someone was saying that the reason you do it is for aesthetic, but it's also for ease of harvesting the next year. And it promotes the raspberry harvest to have to like clip down the branches or like the bramble. So that's 2 cents from my garden group.
Okay. Yes. I was going to say raspberries and blackberries are the other thing that I prune. I also prune my apple trees. I have a dozen apple trees in my yard. They're about, I'm not standing up. They're not bigger than me. They're little dwarf trees. And one of them is absolutely loaded with apples. And I try to prune them. I also prune my grapes. So much more I prune my fruit than my vegetables. All right. I'm seeing from Liz here. Well, first from Tanya. Tanya had an issue with her cucumbers all died. I don't know what would make all of your cucumbers die. So I would need more details for that, but it's plenty of time to plant new ones, and you can plant them from seed or from plants if you can't get the plants.
I actually had the same thing happen to me where I started them from seed on my countertop, transplanted them into my garden bed. I had cats dig up and destroy everything, and then I had to restart them, and I just planted them on Sunday.
Yes.
one still died, but we have two
Oh.
backup ones. So.
Yeah, they when you transplant them, it's there's so many different things could cause. I mean, but mostly they live. So it could be that they were under extreme stress when they were still in the market packs, and once they got in the ground, they gave up the ghost, or something cutworms come along and bite them off, and suddenly you've got plants that are laying there in the soil, not attached to the roots anymore. There are certain bugs that carry virus that will cause your plants to wilt, but generally not this early in the season. So depends on when, how big they were when they died and what the conditions were when they died. But it's, again, it's not too late to plant them. Companion planting, how close can you put stuff in your grow box? Actually, this is my box was an earth box, which is different than a grow box. Costs about twice as much, but it's 5 times as sturdy. My earth box is just short of a foot by 2.5 feet. So the directions that come with them say I could plant 2 tomatoes in there. And that's about my limit. I was pretending to be planting tomatoes. We were using this as to imagine what if we were out in the field and we had a big plot. So in a space that big, remember that our frame of reference for most of what we plant is a 5-gallon bucket. And I can, if I have the same amount of soil as a 5-gallon bucket, I can plant probably 1 tomato in that. And so this is, I'm guessing, my grow box. I keep looking over at it here. There's my grow box. Oh, I can't. Never mind. Wait. Maybe. I'm knocking the whole ladder over. All right, okay. Here's my little grow box here. Can you see my grow box? Say yes, you can see it, or no?
Yes, we can see your grow box if you tilt it down just a tiny bit more.
This way?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so there's my grow box. My grow box is almost a foot wide. It's probably 11 inches wide by 2.5 feet. I have 2 cucumbers in there. I could probably get away with 3 cucumbers in there. 2 tomatoes, 2 eggplants, 4 peppers in that much space. But remember, it's 10 inches deep. So I have plenty of soil going down. And because this is an earth box, this is sub-irrigated, so I don't have to worry very often about it drying out. So those are the conditions that mean I can grow more in there than I would out in the field.
Are you saying you can grow all of those plants in that one box?
No. If I had cucumbers, I would grow 3 cucumbers. If I had peppers, I would grow 4 peppers. If tomatoes, I would grow 2 tomatoes. Eggplant, depending on the variety, I could grow 2 or 3 eggplants. But choose one of those, not all of those altogether. Okay, can we come up now? All right. So beans, I could put lots of beans in there. I could put a whole row of beans in there.
Can you talk about single versus multiple harvest crop, and also what's a trap crop, because Leo mentioned that and I've never heard of that in my entire life.
Okay, I have a problem with white flies in my garden. White flies, they're tiny little white flies, and they totally cover my kale, my collards. They make it look moldy on the underside. A plant that particularly is loved by white flies is basil. So what I might do is I might put sacrificial plants. That's what a trap crop is. It's a sacrificial plant. I put that in the garden with the understanding that I'm going to either spray the heck out of that to kill everybody. Once the bugs all move over to that, I'm going to either spray the heck out of it, or I'm going to paper, trash bag it and haul it out of there. So it becomes the trap for the plants, for the bugs, to draw the bugs away from another plant. So that's what a trap crop is.
And what about single versus multi-harvest crops?
Single versus multi-harvest crops. Okay, cut and come again is what we call multi-harvest. So instead of growing heads of lettuce that you have to wait for the plant to make the whole head before you harvest it, you might plant something called a butterhead, or you might plant from seed a wide row, just scattering it like you're feeding chickens. Fill the whole row with seeds, and as the seeds turn into baby plants, you cut them with scissors so that you are harvesting. I mean, I have spinach growing in my garden, and I have already 3 times harvested I harvested this section here, then I harvested this section here, then I harvested this section here, and by then I'm back to the first section harvesting that. So I've been able, out of a piece that's probably as big as this, I have gotten 3, 4, 5. I'm into my 5th harvest, onto my 6th out of the same space. So I've gotten the same plants I've cut at least twice, and they are still continuing to grow back. So what other plants work well? Any of the greens, any of the leafy greens grow. So lettuce, spinach, mustard, turnip greens, kale. Kale makes baby kale, but kale wants to make a bigger plant, and I can keep harvesting from the kale. Same as with collards. I would just keep cutting up from the bottom, leaving the growing tip to put more plant out. So I'm taking the leaves up from the bottom. So I'm effectively pruning the plant to grow tall, like my tomato, but I'm eating the pieces that I'm removing.
My question, I typed it in, but I have a question about using leaves for mulch, and particularly holly leaves, since I have a ginormous holly tree in my yard.
Okay, the question is holly leaves in mulch as opposed to regular leaves in mulch. I hate
any leaves. Yeah.
I hate holly leaves because I have an American holly, and it has pickers, and they never break down because they're such waxy leaves. So they make a terrible compost. So holly leaves in a mulch, regular other leaves are great, and the more variety you have, the better. Because if all you're using is oak leaves, they are very tough and they break down slowly. Maple leaves break down really fast. If you mix maple leaves with oak leaves, then you get fast breaking down and slow breaking down, so you get a really nice mix to feed your micro critters. But holly, if it's the pickery kind, nasty stuff to have in your compost.
I was just hoping it would keep the animals out.
More it's going to keep you unhappy than keep the animals.
Thanks.
Can I ask about the spotted lanternfly? You mentioned it in passing, and we just discovered them this week, and we're just wondering what in the world we're supposed to do with all those spotted lanternfly nymphs in the garden. Okay,
here's the problem. People are using neem oil on them. They're sucking insects, so they would prefer. So safer soap is probably more effective. The problem is that they are so tough, and there are so many of them, that in order to spray enough safer soap or the insecticidal soap on the plants to kill them, it's detrimental to the plants. So if they're growing, they seem to love my grapevine. So I'm really careful about what I would spray, whether I would spray a whole lot of insecticidal soap on my grapevine enough to kill them, but they also like the porcelain vine, which is a weed. So I could spray the heck out of them on the porcelain vine and not have have no fear at all. Much more effective, and I will put this in the notes that everybody gets after this class is over. If you were in last week's class, you'll have gotten it already. Penn State put out plans for a DIY trap that is very, very effective. One of the students, young May, brought me 2 of them. She's awesome. She made 2 of them using their plants, and they're great to put around a tree trunk because what the suckers they want to climb. They want to climb, and you're catching them in the net, and then you funnel them into a disposable bag. So it's a great system, and it uses no chemicals.
Young May, I think, is here today because they linked a link for pruning tomatoes. And also Pam says that Vaseline also works on the lanternfly nymphs.
To trap them or it's not good for your plants.
I'm not sure if it's for trapping or for killing them, but whatever they're doing, I guess it's working
long enough for you to smear Vaseline on them. So I would guess that you put it, you wrap it around. There's a product also called Tanglefoot that they use for caterpillars. And what you do is it's like a Vaseline. It's a sticky trap, but you wrap something around the tree first and then smear this on the wrapper rather than smearing this on the tree. So I would suggest that. Squish all the lanternflies. Yes, it gets my, definitely gets my vote. Okay. I don't want to think about them anymore, so please don't ask any more questions about the lanternflies. Who's up?
I have a quick question. Cassidy, you had mentioned a group, and I may have butchered the name. I thought you said Puffin.
Yeah, so I can link the group, but it's Puffin, P-U-F-N. If you Google it, it should be the first thing that comes up. It's Philadelphia Urban Farm Network. I'm going to copy paste it into the chat right now for everybody.
It's Craigslist for farmers and gardeners, and it's an awesome, so you could, a lot of people are experts. You can also, if you can access the archives, you can search for answers to the questions before you ask them, and somebody says, we just answered that last week. So see if you can access their archives. They're a Google group. You have to ask to join them, but I don't know that they've ever disapproved anybody. But it takes a day to get accepted into the group. But then you can ask all of your questions, and also if you have things to share, that's a good place to put them.
I'll ask you about that asparagus, because I inherited this bed and it has asparagus growing, you know, about 6 plants. But some are like big 1-inch stalks and they're 3 feet tall. And then there's some fern plants, and then there's some stuff coming out of the ground. And I don't know whether I should remove the whole mess of them or is there something I can do to bring them back?
If you've got about 6 plants up, are they still putting up spikes? Where are you?
In Fairmount Park.
Oh, you're in Fairmount Park. Okay. So they should already be up. But if you've got spikes still coming up, I would walk away from them and let them come up and make the ferns, because that's what's going to feed your plant for next year. So but you don't want to do anything to them, just work around them.
And then at the end of the season, just cut everything
when
back.
they die, you can cut them back, but not until they die.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, how often should you turn your dirt in your yard?
In your yard or in your garden?
Well, I have a yard that I, want to start planting. So I turn the dirt to make it better before I start gardening.
If you can get compost and add compost to it as you're turning it, that's your best bet. If you have a really, your yard has been growing lots of good weeds or lots of good grass, then chances are that your soil is decent. But you still want to add lots of organic matter to it, just to keep it able to now support the new vegetables that you're planting.
Okay, thank you.
Who else had their hand?
I have grapes growing in my yard, and this is like the second season. I know that they said not to feed them the first and to cut some of the suckers, or the not suckers, but the flowers off. trying to see how to get them. I know I need to feed them. What do you recommend feeding them? What size compost?
Compost. I have grapevines here that are 15 years old. I brought them from my old house where they were 100 years old and they were never fed. And at one point they covered 5 houses. So compost is what makes grapes happy.
Okay.
If you need to prune them back, I'm pruning mine back because they're on the fence between me and my neighbor, and they will grow over and they will eat my neighbor. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting them back. You know, I've got a branch that's like 4 feet long and it's got grape flowers along it and then a foot of new growth. So I will cut it back to right after the last grape bunch, the flower. Or I'll even prune off one more flower, because the fewer flowers that ripen up into fruit, the better and larger your fruit will be.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Because they're putting all their energy into their energy is diffused out across all of the grapes, and often you'll see that the clusters don't ripen up all at the same time if there are too many grapes on the vine. So cut the grapevine back to make it fit better where you want to do it. But best time to prune grapes is in the spring. And there's lots of YouTubes out there about that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanya. So I had to walk away for a little bit. I wasn't sure if you answered the question about cucumbers and the ideal like environment for growing cucumbers. I planted about several seeds and they all have died. And I don't know if it's
When did they die, Tanya? Did they come up and die, or did they come up, grow for a while and die, or make vines and die?
So so they didn't even get to that point. They grew, I would say like transition to like a little, started doing like the adult leaves, and then they started like drooping over and dried out. And I'm like, I don't know if it's too much sun, too little, too much water, too little water.
Did you planted them from seed outside?
So, I'm sorry. So I took like the eggshell and I started in using like the eggshells and planted them in the house using like leftover egg cartons. And then once they sprouted, I put them into like a plastic container, put holes in the bottom of the container, put some soil in, and then I put like several of them in that one container. And that's when they just started like dying out.
Okay, so it was when you transplanted them that they died? Okay, I would say that something happened in the process of transplanting them. And so if you have the time, I mean, if you still got some seeds, I would put them in from seed in the container, not start them, because now there's no advantage to starting them indoors.
Right.
Get them right in the container and get them going.
Oh, okay. I see.
Because then there's no transition shock. There's no shock from planting them when their roots could have gotten disturbed.
Right. Okay. I was thinking that too. All righty.
Okay. Great minds.
This might be too broad, but I'm just wondering how you know when a plant is dying because it's at the end of its life versus malnourished or diseased or for some other reason. So my peas, for instance, had an extended growth spurt, but are suddenly browning despite plenty of water and sunshine. And I have no idea what's going on.
Peas. Did they grow peas?
They didn't, no.
They didn't. Okay, so then that's not a maturity. They have not hit senescence or over maturity. That's a different story altogether. What makes peas? All of the plants are turning brown?
Yes, but I'm also starting to see little tendrils work their way up from the soil, new ones entirely. But all of the taller, more mature ones are browning from the bottom. It looks like they're drying up, but they have plenty of water.
Okay, so they're the whole plant has turned brown, or they're turning brown from bottom up?
At this point, it's the entire thing's turned brown.
I don't know, but you know what? There's this miraculously wonderful thing called Ask a Gardener. That's part of the Horticultural Society's library, because although the library is physically closed, the librarians do not sleep. So what I would say is take some pictures and send them to Ask a Gardener. It's one word, Ask a Gardener at penhort.org. Cassidy, can you put that in the, I could put that in the notes, couldn't I? Ask a Gardener at, and send them pictures. Because it could be that somebody, this is not something that rings a bell for me. So are they in a container or are they in the ground? Are they, where are they?
They're in a pot.
They're what?
They're in a pot, so they're in a container.
They're in a pot, okay.
Yes, and there were several that were growing in the same pot, up a trellis.
How big is the pot?
About, gosh, 15 centimeters in diameter.
Okay, what's that in inches? That's 5 inches?
Oof.
6 inches.
That sounds about right, yes.
That's too small. That is too small. And it's possible that at one point in time they add either too much water or not enough water, and that's what's doing them in. If they were in the ground and they started to do that, I would be very perplexed. But if they're in a 6-inch pot, that's big, 6-inch pot.
That looks about right.
Yeah, that's too crowded for them, and there's no margin for error in the pot.
Thank you.
Cassidy, let's recap. Is there anything that we need to send out to these folks before next week? Information about?
I would say we can send out the companion planting. We can send out the seasonality chart for sure. Yeah. I know a lot of people are asking for the soil workshop. So as soon as that gets edited and uploaded, we will make sure that people get that link to view past workshops. But I think that's everything.
Okay. Well, we're going to turn everybody's mics on so we can hoot and holler and yell and throw hugs and kisses and do all of that stuff. And then we're going to get out of Dodge because Sally's hungry and Cassidy is past her bedtime. And I'm sure you all have something else to do.
Thank you.
So,
bye.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you all. This is all a great thing. Great.
Please love my virtual background, which is my real background. I'm actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.